Hi, it's Richard Moore from Racing Profits Guides, and we're here at York Racecourse with the Head of Marketing and Sponsorship, James Brennan. Nice to see you today, James. How are you doing?
Very good, thanks. Welcome to Knavesmire.
Thank you very much. And what we'll do first of all, James, if we can, let's just discuss a bit about the history of York Racecourse. Obviously, it goes back quite a few years, 2,000 odd years, would you say?
Well, indeed, it's the first piece of flat land that you'd come to coming out of Micklegate Bar, so quite probably the Roman cavalry exercised here. Of course, much of the history of racing links to cavalry regiments. We go all the way back to the Roman soldiers, so a connection 2,000 years on. Of course, there's another pretty successful Italian rider.
There is, in Dettori, of course. And when was racing first held on the Knavesmire then?
Well, on this particular site, 1731, so some 8 years before Dick Turpin met his end, just overlooking the old 2-mile start there on Tadcaster Road. So we always tell people that racing used to be a sideshow to public executions. The other way round now, unless you're riding the Ebor favourite and give him a stinker.
Of course. And you mentioned Dick Turpin there. He was actually hung on the Knavesmire, was he?
He was, yeah, over on Tadcaster Road, so overlooking the sort of the back straight, effectively, 1739. So we were already an established attraction here in the city of York at that time.
Mm-hmm. And who ran the racecourse then? Because it's now run by York Racecourse Company, is it the LLP?
Indeed, well, as with a lot of racing through that period of time, it fell slightly into disrepair with brigands and some chicanery going on. So dial forward to 1843, and the upstanding men formed the York Race Committee, really with the intention of establishing the racecourse that we know now, focusing on quality racing and giving, even back then, a proper customer experience. So 1843, the Race Committee forms. You're right, we're now technically known as York Racecourse Knavesmire LLP, so a limited liability partnership. That's a sensible thing in terms of keeping the tax efficiency, so we can keep investing in prize money in the place, and also it means the individual committee members aren't responsible if anything untoward happens in terms of the modern era of all the health and safety regulations.
That's right, yeah. And so it's always been privately owned then, it's never been part of the Jockey Club or any other organisation?
That's right, we're genuinely independent. In terms of ownership, the shares of the LLP are all owned by the trust, and it's what's known as a bear trust. It always was from 1843, so nobody takes any money out of the course. Yes, we look to use commercial best practice, but the intention of that is to generate money so that we can invest in prize money, up north of £6 million for the 2014 season, invest in fixed facilities. We may be talking later about the Northern End development. Absolutely, and indeed invest in the racegoer experience, so big screens, that sort of thing. So no money goes out to either shareholders or to some individual owner. It all gets reinvested back here in the site.
Fabulous. And so back in the history then, when were the first stands actually erected here on the Knavesmire?
Well, our old stand is still here. At least one story of it is. It does sterling service to this day as the Champagne Bar. So people who are regulars at Knavesmire will look up and see that the balustrading on the 1754 stand. The architect was a chap called John Carr. Right. He was the most celebrated Georgian architect.
He was local, was he? Local.
He was. He did work all over the country. Did the assembly rooms in the city centre, and is credited with much of the work at Harewood House that many visitors to the county will know as well. So the John Carr stand crops up in various architectural histories. 1754, our first one.
Wow. And there's been obviously more stands added over the years, and we'll go into a bit more detail when we look at the development of York, but just quickly run through the development of the stands here.
Well, effectively the traditional county stand, or the old county stand as we know it, is an Edwardian building, so built during the 1890s. That's the one with the barber pole and with the fretwork, and is itself a listed building. Then if you headed south down the track to about the half furlong mark, you'd see the Knavesmire stand. That dates from 1997. So putting them in the order that you'd encounter them as you ran up the stands. The Knavesmire stand on your right, 1997. Right. The Ebor stand is the next one, the biggest of the stands, 2003. Right. Then we drop back over a century to the 1890s and the Edwardian stand, and then the red tiled one at the end overlooking the Parade Ring. That's called the Melrose stand. Hails originally from 1989, but we did a major refit of that one in 2010 and actually more or less found 2 new floors.
Did you? Lovely. And there's also quite a royal connection here at York as well, isn't there? There's been royals ride here, come here and watch racing regularly. Obviously we had Royal Ascot here.
Yes, again over the time, the Sport of Kings has very much lived up to that name here at York. Princess Mary was a regular visitor at the turn of the 20th century. There's a bar that remembers her visits to us here. Of course, Her Majesty the Queen, been a regular visitor. Royal Ascot at York 2005, 5 fantastic days. Other people will remember seeing the first running of what's now the Juddmonte International as Roberto downed the colours of the mighty Brigadier Gerard. Her Majesty was here that day to see that occasion and has been a visitor many times during her reign. And you're right, her daughter Princess Anne, now the Princess Royal, was a winner here. Won the 1988 Queen Mother's Cup, still probably the best known of the races for lady amateur riders.
Prize of which is what?
Well, because it's for amateurs, you see, you can't go winning money. She'd have lost her amateur status. So then and to this day, the winning rider wins their weight in champagne. The only time you'll see a jockey try and put weight on.
For the race. And there's also obviously been some iconic races held here. I think the one we've discussed earlier historically was the Big Match. Just explain a little bit about that.
Yes, the Big Match. Well, 1851 was the Big Match. I don't think really in the modern era we can understand quite how central the horse was to life back in the 1840s, 1850s. Of course, it was the only way realistically of getting around. Yes, steam trains were starting, but really it was all about the horse. So we'd had a Derby and a St Leger winner in 1849. The following year, 1850, we'd had a Derby and a St Leger winner. So 2 horses that were absolute superstars, very much the top of their game. One was called the Flying Dutchman, the other was called Voltiger. Who was the best? How to decide? I know, let's have a match race. And they did it here. The spring of 1851.
So it's literally 2 horses in the race.
2 horses, a match race, hence the name, The Great Match. Now, if I turn to the camera and show you our logo here, and show you a horse appearing there, that's the winner of the Great. That's Voltiger.
That's Voltiger who won the Great Race.
No,
he didn't.
He didn't.
Oh,
with that Yorkshire love of the underdog, Voltiger in fact came second in the Great Match. The Flying Dutchman won, but Voltiger, as not a bad consolation prize, we hope, got adopted as our logo to this day.
Very good. And he went on to win the following year, was it? He won the Leger as well, and the.
He'd won the year before, so in concurrent years they'd obviously both as in their 3-year-old classic season had both won a Derby and a St Leger. So they came and tried to decide when they were both respectively 4 and 5 which of them was the best, and it turned out to be the Flying Dutchman. But Voltiger gets his place in history.
Became your logo.
Became our logo, and of course commemorates. Again, in terms of the Neptune Investment Management Great Voltiger Stakes, run on the opening day of the Ebor Festival, a regular signpost to the St Leger.
Races in Europe, isn't it?
Big race for 3-year-old colts, big race in its own right, but also a big signpost to Town Moor's activities a couple of weeks later.
Lovely. And so the crowd that day, there was talk of 250,000 here that day for the Big Match.
Yeah, wasn't it great to live in a world where you didn't have to worry about counting them in, or you didn't have to worry about any of the modern constraints on operating a sporting venue? Absolutely. They say 250,000. Of course, they didn't have to pay to get in.
It was free. And what would you compare that to in the modern day? What sort of was your biggest crowds here over the last few years?
Well, in absolute numbers, we look back at the meeting we borrowed from Royal Ascot in 2005, so some big crowds with some extra space put on in those 5 glorious days. In more recent history, 2007, 2010, each of our July Saturdays, either the John Smith's Cup Day or indeed the Music Showcase Saturday, have nudged over 42,000 souls here on the Knavesmire, so pretty big crowds. We hope that we've kept improving the facilities to cope with those large numbers, and of course the more people who come, the more it allows us to reinvest the following year.
Absolutely. And is the centre of the course still public land then?
The ownership of the land itself is vested in the City of York Council. They were granted it by the freemen of the city, so they now run it on behalf of the city. We have a 99-year lease, of which there's about 97 years left on the current version, to operate it as a racecourse. We get the whole of the course the week before and the week after racing. The stands in which we're in front of, we get those fortunately 365 days a year on the lease.
So it's not like Epsom are free in the middle?
Outside of racing, it is common land owned by the City of York Council. We try not to be too prescriptive actually during race days, but we just have to have an eye on keeping people safe and keep all horses safe. So we don't charge for you to come to the middle over by the start for for the Judd 1 International. That would be a free of charge access. The picnic area, as many people would consider it in the middle, is sort of £5 or £10 depending on the day. Bring a picnic and see some world-class horse racing. Wow,
fantastic. And then bringing us right up to date, obviously we had the Olympics recently, and I think you had the Olympic torch here.
That's right. We've had our own other little sort of non-racing bits of history over the years. 1982, His Holiness Pope John Paul II came and said open air mass here, using many of the racecourse facilities, but the big open space that is the Knavesmire.
100,000 there, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah, 200,000, 250,000 people came to see him. He only came once. We do it every year.
Yeah. He should be back.
And then highlights in the sporting sense. The Olympic torch was carried down the track by the inimitable Harvey Smith in June of 2012. Followed up later that same summer, the Paralympic lantern came to visit us, and completing the sporting set. We're already looking forward to July the 6th, 2014, when day 2 of Le Grand Départ of the Tour de France will leave from about 100 yards away from where we're standing.
Fabulous. So still very active in the community. Is that something you always try and promote here at York? Very much a community course still?
Absolutely. I mean, we've been part of the city's heritage since 1731. Most of our neighbours have kind of grown out to us and grown out round us. There's only Bishopthorpe Fallis that's been here longer.
Fabulous. Well, thank you for your time on that, James. We'll just move on to a bit about the actual development of the course. That's great. Thank you.